Hello, welcome back. It's the next 6 months, the daily show, daily for the moment at least, where I talk to Mark Thomas, author of 99%, business strategist, and, well, many other things too. Here's his book, 99%, How We've Been Screwed and How to Fight Back, full of facts. One thing we haven't really talked about so far, Mark, is the climate crisis. If you listen to President Trump, it's basically all a load of hot air, or maybe not so hot. If you listen to other people, it's too late to take action in any case. It's all rather depressing. How does one go about working out what the current state of play really is and what we can do about it?
Well, I'm not a climate scientist, but what I have observed is that there's a strong consensus among people who are climate scientists. So on the NASA website, for example, they have cited a statistic that 97% of all peer-reviewed papers on the subject agree that climate change is real and that it's man-made. On this subject, as a layperson, that's how I would decide. I would follow the science. I don't know if you remember when Greta Thunberg first came on to British radio. She was being interviewed. I think she was only 15 at the time, and the presenter, in a slightly condescending voice, talked to this 15-year-old girl and said, "And so, what do you think we should be doing about it?" And I thought, oh dear, he's going to rip her apart because she's going to say, "Oh well, we need to." Reduce CO2 emissions by 37% and so, in the next 10 years. And then he's going to say, but all these people disagree with you. And she didn't say that at all. She said, listen to the science. And I thought, well, what a brilliant answer. How hard it is to argue with that answer. And, when there's a 97% consensus, that means, this is the best state of knowledge among the best experts in the world. And if you're not one of the best experts, then I think that's the way to go. Listen to the science. So that's the answer to the first part of your question. How does a layman decide what to do? That's my advice. Listen to the science. Okay.
There is a problem with that. And I think a lot of this comes from the States. And that is that there's such a strange attitude prevalent now that says that whatever the establishment view is, it's a lie, it's propaganda, it's it's fake news. This is very difficult to deal with because we're basically dealing with ignorance.
Yes, well, that's true. And very well-funded ignorance because there has been a very actively funded climate change counter-movement in the States, funded to a large extent by very big businesses with interests in chemicals and fossil fuels. And this has been well researched, and it is actually covered briefly in the book. That this climate change counter movement has been running for many years, and they've essentially followed the same pattern as the tobacco companies followed.
I was going to say, yes. I mean, it seems to me that the basic goal is just to maintain the status quo. So how do you do that? Well, you prevent change and you confuse people, basically. So, well, on the one hand, some people say this, but on the other hand, other people say that. And they always end up with this, whether it's tobacco or whatever else, they always end up with this, we need more research into this. It'll take another 10, 20 years.
Exactly. And, that strategy, which was pioneered by the tobacco companies in the 1950s after Sir Richard Dole did his preliminary research, which did establish beyond scientific doubt that there was a link. And the tobacco companies got together, they hired a PR strategist whose name I have forgotten, and he came up with this, for them, brilliant, and for the rest of the world, disastrous strategy of doing exactly what you've said. That he said, look, we can't argue against it. This is really good quality research. We can't say it's wrong. So what we'll do is we'll pretend to welcome it, and we'll say this is a very, very constructive, useful contribution to the debate. And this is really help to understand one side of the argument. Now, of course, what we need is to hear the other sides of the argument, and then once we've got proper research on both sides, then it would be time to take a decision. And then you can always find some rogue academics who will do research for you if your pockets are deep enough. And that's exactly what the climate change movement did as well. So there are a few rogue academics that have put out papers saying, no, this is not true. And it's muddied the water. And of course, because there's so much money behind the climate change counter movement, even though they don't actually have very much at all in the way of evidence compared with the other side, they've basically got 3% compared with 97%. They get about 50% of the airtime in the States. And as a result, in the States, compared with most other countries in the world, there's a much higher percentage of people who simply don't believe that climate change is real. As you say, it's a kind of propaganda problem as much as an action problem, that you've got a big chunk of the population who are non-believers. I think there's also another point, which is that in some countries, when they decide to take action, they do it in an intelligent way and they compensate the losers. So, for example, if you were going to take an aggressive stance against businesses which pollute, there would be consequences for people who work in those businesses. If you've got no safety net, and the consequence, therefore, is that they risk starvation because actually the only big employer in their town is this oil company or this chemical company, because the safety net is so poor, then you can understand them having a really strong interest in that not happening, and therefore in denying climate change. Whereas
it's always about jobs. It's about jobs, basically. I mean, you know, that's a sort of a conversation stopper, isn't it? So, well, it's about jobs, and then people say, oh, well, fine, we're not going to do anything. But you're absolutely right. You've got this interesting graph that I'm looking at here. From your website. I don't think it's in the book, but it's certainly on the 99% website. Explain to us what this represents, please, Mark.
Well, it's basically saying there's a spectrum of attitudes to climate change. We've been mainly talking about the left-hand end, which is the denialism end, where the extreme form of that is to say the whole thing is a hoax. Most of the denialists are not quite there. They're in the second one, where they say, oh, it's real, but it's not man-made. It's just a natural thing. You know, we've been getting warmer and colder. It's all down to cycles in the sun. And therefore, it's not man-made. It's not our doing, and it's not our problem. I think that's probably where the bulk of the denialism is. Then you've got some people who say, no, it is real, and we have caused it, but the last thing we should do is to have governments trying to intervene to fix it, because that will only make it worse.
No, quite, absolutely,
Heaven forfend that should happen. What we should do is to leave it to the magic of market forces, because if there really is a need for carbon capture and storage, the market will plug it far more efficiently than any government could, etc., etc. And therefore, we should do nothing. So that's the denialist end. But there's also another end, which is, I think in practice, not as dangerous, but it's still dangerous, which is catastrophism, which is saying this is an utter catastrophe, and everything we've ever done
is too late.
It's too late. Now, it is conceivable that it's too late, because there have been some papers recently that have pointed out that certain self-reinforcing processes have kind of kicked in. For example, in the Arctic Circle, in the north of Siberia and so on, where more and more methane is being released into the atmosphere, which is a hugely damaging greenhouse gas. Very disturbing. And there's no doubt that to some extent that is happening, and there's no doubt that that's really bad news. But again, if you look for the scientific consensus, what does NASA say about it? Well, NASA says actually it's too late to stop there being any impact from all of our man-made activities over the last 200 years. But it's not too late to mitigate that and to transform our economy and to basically take action in order to safeguard the world and to safeguard ultimately livelihoods and the economy. Then slightly less extreme than saying it's too late, you've got people who say, well, it's not too late, but we need to abandon capitalism altogether, or we need to abandon growth altogether. Now, I don't think there's a huge number of people that believe that, but if they were, let's take the abandoning growth case.
Well, Prince Charles, possibly. We don't know.
I don't know what. Yeah, but possibly he does. But we actually have had a kind of natural experiment over the last few months of what happens when you abandon growth.
Yeah, we
COVID.
have, haven't we? With absolutely, yeah. No planes in the sky, nobody going out in the city centre.
Yeah, and you can see actually there was a noticeable reduction in, for example, you live in central London, there was a noticeable reduction in pollution in central London at the height of the lockdown.
Absolutely.
You could see it, and globally there were noticeable reductions in harmful emissions. So if you completely got rid of growth, you would be able, of course, to have an impact on the environment. But we've also seen what it means economically, that far from everybody being in it together during COVID, what we've seen is a land grab by the wealthiest. So most people have suffered significantly from that end to growth. But we mentioned this, I think, on a previous discussion. The world's billionaires have seen their wealth increased by 27% during lockdown.
Nothing but good news,
Nothing but good news. Now, the reason for that is, of course, power. They've got a huge amount of power. So if we were somehow to go post-growth, unless you get rid of their power, then the same thing is going to happen again, that you're going to get... it would be like permanent lockdown in terms of the typical family and the impact on their finances.
Well, we'd end up living in a feudal state, really, wouldn't we? Something like that.
We would end up very quickly in a feudal state, or else you have to have a violent revolution. Now, there's a long history of violent revolutions all around the world, and occasionally they're not too disastrous. But the idea that a violent revolution is the way is a safe and sure
the only
route
solution. No, heaven forbid.
The only solution is a nonsense, and therefore you're sort of forced back into that middle zone, which we've called the action zone, which is to say no. We urgently need to transform our economy. The climate arguments are real, but there's also realpolitik, that we have to accept that the power structures are as they are, and we have to re-engineer things within our current democratic systems, because once you throw those aside, you've got no idea where you're going to end up. So the action zone is to say this is a climate emergency. We need very radical action, but it needs to be carefully thought through and measured, and it does need to be democratic.
And this is the art of the possible, as politics has been described.
The art of the possible, exactly. Yeah. So in a nutshell, that's the argument, that either end of the spectrum is not going to fix the climate problem, and if it doesn't fix the climate problem, there'll be all sorts of other problems it doesn't fix either. It's only by taking that middle path, which is not to say you shouldn't be radical. It absolutely is very radical, but it's radical changes within our system and re-engineering of our system rather than a revolution.
And it could draw support from a very wide range of people too, on the political left, right, Greens, you name it, actually. It's quite possible.
Yes, I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, I think so. I think most people that I've spoken to in the Green Party do see it that way. And I think, as you say, most people in the other parties would also see it that way.
Yeah, cool. Excellent. Great. And another eye-opening episode here from Mark. Do get hold of the book, please. There's lots of facts and figures. So much misinformation floating around these days. Opinions about all kinds of things that nobody really is basing facts and figures. But Mark is absolutely, as you all know by now, actually. I mean, he doesn't say anything that can't be well and truly proved. with good reference. Probably about a third of the book is reference, actually. So it's a really valuable resource, 99%. Do get hold of it. The buy link is down there. Just put that into the browser, 99.redhammer.tv. It'll take you straight through to the Amazon buy page, where you can get it, excuse me, on Kindle or paperback. Both very reasonably priced. We'll be back in your sweet arms tomorrow.